There are hospital policies that make sense, hospital policies that are annoying, and hospital policies that make you question everything. The basement door at St. Mary's falls into the third category. For 9 years, I accepted that it was always locked. Last Tuesday night, I found out why, and I wish I never had. My name is Jennifer Walsh. I've been working emergency medicine at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago for 9 years. I've seen overdoses, car crashes, heart attacks, and every type of medical emergency you can imagine. I thought I knew every corner of this hospital, but there was always that door, B-level access, basement storage, always locked, always off limits, staff only, but somehow never any staff I knew had access to it. Why is that door always locked? I asked Dr. Harrison, our chief of emergency medicine, during my 3rd year. Hospital storage, he said without looking up from his charts. Nothing interesting. Old equipment, archived files, the hospital administration keeps it secured for liability reasons. 9 years. 9 years I walked past that door during night shifts, hearing the occasional sound from behind it. Mechanical noises, ventilation systems, sometimes what sounded like elevator movements, which was strange because the hospital blueprints showed no elevator access to that level. What happened last Tuesday changed everything I thought I knew about medicine, ethics, and the people I trusted with patients' lives. It started with Mrs. Rodriguez, Carmen Rodriguez, 67 years old, brought in with severe chest pain around 11 p.m. Classic heart attack presentation. We worked on her for 47 minutes. Dr. Harrison led the code blue. We gave her everything: CPR, defibrillation, emergency medications. At 11:47 p.m., Dr. Harrison called it time of death, las 11:47. Standard procedure followed. I cleaned the body, filled out paperwork, called the morgue for pickup. But here's what bothered me. The morgue team arrived in less than 10 minutes. They never respond that fast. Hospital morgue pickups usually take at least an hour. Fast response tonight, I commented to the morgue attendant. Special case, he said, loading Mrs. Rodriguez onto the gurney. Dr. Harrison's orders. They wheeled her toward the elevators, but instead of going up to the morgue on the 3rd floor, I watched them turn toward the basement level. Hey! I called out, the morgue is upstairs. Different protocol tonight, the attendant said without stopping. I followed them to the basement corridor and watched them wheel Mrs. Rodriguez's body toward that locked door. One of them swiped a keycard and the door opened. For just a moment, before the door closed, I saw something that made no sense. It wasn't storage behind that door. It was another corridor. Well lit, clean, with what looked like medical equipment, and I could swear I heard the sound of heart monitors beeping. But Mrs. Rodriguez was dead. Her heart had stopped. Dr. Harrison had pronounced her, so why would there be heart monitors behind a storage door? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez, about the unusual speed of the morgue pickup, about that glimpse of medical equipment behind the locked door. 3 days later, Mr. Peterson came in. James Peterson, 52 years old, motorcycle accident. Massive head trauma, internal bleeding. We worked on him for over an hour. Dr. Harrison called it at 2:33 a.m. Same pattern, fast morgue response. Body wheeled toward the basement instead of up to the 3rd floor. The same locked door. This time, I was ready. I positioned myself in the supply closet across from the basement corridor and watched through the small window. The morgue attendants swiped the keycard and wheeled Mr. Peterson through the door. But they left it open for just a few seconds longer this time. What I saw made my blood freeze. It wasn't a storage area. It was an elevator. A freight elevator that went down, not up. And there were multiple levels indicated on the control panel. B1, B2, B3. Our hospital wasn't supposed to have sub-basement levels. According to every floor plan I'd ever seen, the basement was the lowest level of St. Mary's Hospital. But someone had built 3 additional floors underground, and they were taking our dead patients down there. Over the next week, I started paying attention to patterns I'd never noticed before. Patients who died during Dr. Harrison's shifts were always removed quickly by the same morgue team. Patients who died during other doctors' shifts followed normal protocols. Families were contacted. Bodies remained in the morgue upstairs until funeral arrangements were made. But Dr. Harrison's patients disappeared. No family notification. No funeral arrangements. No death certificates filed with the city. It was like they had never existed. I started keeping a list: Carmen Rodriguez, James Peterson, Maria Santos, Tommy Williams, Davy G. Keene, Sarah Chun. 12 patients in 3 weeks. All pronounced dead by Dr. Harrison. All removed quickly to the basement. All with no subsequent death records in the hospital system. Either Dr. Harrison was the most careless doctor in the hospital when it came to paperwork, or something was very wrong. Last Tuesday night, I found out which one it was. And what I discovered behind that locked door will haunt me for the rest of my life. Before I tell you what I found behind that door, you need to understand the layout of St. Mary's Hospital and why what I discovered was so impossible. St. Mary's is a 12-story building built in 1987. The basement level contains maintenance systems, storage, laundry facilities, and the hospital's central utilities. According to every architectural plan, blueprint, and city record, the basement is the lowest level of the building. I know this because I've worked here for 9 years. I've been in every authorized area of this hospital. I've delivered supplies to basement storage, helped with equipment moves, even worked overtime shifts that required accessing maintenance areas. The basement has concrete floors, exposed utilities, and that institutional basement smell of cleaning chemicals and machinery. It's functional, utilitarian, and completely mapped out in the staff orientation materials every employee receives. But over my 9 years here, I'd started noticing things that didn't quite add up. The basement corridor, where the locked door was located, seemed longer than it should be, based on the building's footprint. When I looked at the hospital from outside, the basement extended further than the upper floors suggested. The ventilation system in that corridor was more sophisticated than typical basement storage would require. Hospital storage rooms don't need advanced air filtration and climate control, and there were the sounds. During quiet night shifts, when the hospital settled and most of the building was calm, I could hear mechanical noises from behind that door. Not just building systems, instinctive sounds like elevator mechanisms, electronic beeping, and occasionally what sounded like voices. Do you ever hear sounds from the locked storage room? I asked Janet, another night shift nurse who'd been at St. Mary's for 15 years. What sounds? Janet looked uncomfortable. Beeping, like medical equipment, sometimes voices. Janet glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Jennifer, that's not storage back there. What do you mean? I've been here long enough to remember the construction. In 1994, 7 years after the hospital opened, they did major renovations. Officially, they were upgrading basement systems. But the construction went on for 8 months, and they brought in way more equipment than any utility upgrade would require. What kind of equipment? Medical equipment. Surgical tables, anesthesia machines, monitoring systems, enough to outfit multiple operating rooms. But why would they put operating rooms in the basement? Janet shrugged. The official story was emergency backup facilities in case of disasters. But Jennifer, in 15 years, we've never used backup facilities. Even during the 2018 power outage and the 2020 pandemic surge, we never moved operations to the basement. So what's down there? I don't know, but I do know that certain doctors have keycard access, and it's not for storage. After talking to Janet, I started paying closer attention to who had access to that door. Dr. Harrison, obviously, he was the only doctor I'd seen with a keycard. Dr. Martinez, the head of anesthesiology, I'd seen him swipe the card twice during night shifts. Dr. Wong, from pathology, which was strange because pathology was located on the 4th floor, not in basement storage. And occasionally, people I didn't recognize. Not hospital staff, based on their clothing and behavior. Men and women in expensive suits who arrived at night accessed the door and left before morning shifts arrived. Who needs access to basement storage at 2 a.m. while wearing $1,000 suits? 3 weeks ago, I decided to do some research. I accessed the hospital's construction records through the administrative database. Most were routine permits, inspections, standard documentation, but the 1994 renovation records were heavily redacted. Entire sections blacked out. Multiple pages missing, and the company that did the work, Blackwater Medical Construction, had no current business listing when I searched for them online. I checked with the city planning office. According to their records, St. Mary's Hospital has one basement level containing 15,000 square feet of storage and utilities. But the architectural firm that designed the 1994 renovation build for 47,000 square feet of construction work, 32,000 square feet of construction that doesn't officially exist. That's enough space for multiple operating rooms, recovery wards, laboratories, and administrative offices. Someone had built a secret medical facility underneath St. Mary's Hospital, and they were using it for something that required expensive suits, sophisticated medical equipment, and absolute secrecy. Last Tuesday night, I finally got the chance to find out what it was. A slow night in the ER, only 2 patients after midnight, a minor car accident, and a woman with food poisoning. Dr. Harrison had left around 1 a.m., saying he had administrative duties to handle. At 2:15 a.m., I was restocking supply closets in the basement when I heard the elevator. Not the main hospital elevators. A different sound, coming from behind the locked door. Someone was coming up from whatever was beneath the basement. I hid in the janitor's closet and watched through the crack in the door. Dr. Martinez emerged from behind the locked door, followed by 2 people I didn't recognize, a woman in a lab coat and a man in surgical scrubs. They were discussing something in hushed tones. Patient 17 is responding well to the new protocol, the woman said. Blood work looks promising, Dr. Martinez replied. We should be ready for phase 2 trials next week. What about the families? The man in scrubs asked. There are no families, Dr. Martinez said coldly. That's the point of the selection criteria. They walked past my hiding spot toward the main elevators, continuing their conversation. Dr. Harrison's protocols are brilliant, the woman continued. Terminal cases, no next of kin, perfect candidates for extended trials. Extended trials. Terminal cases, no next of kin. They were talking about patients who had supposedly died and been removed to the basement. After they left, I stood in that basement corridor for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd heard. Dr. Harrison wasn't just removing dead patients quickly, he was selecting specific patients' terminal cases with no families and taking them somewhere for medical trials. But if they were dead, how could they be trial subjects, unless they weren't actually dead? At 3 a.m., I made the decision that changed everything. I was going to find out what was behind that locked door, and I was going to discover what had happened to Carmen Rodriguez, James Peterson, and all the other patients who had supposedly died but seemed to have become research subjects instead. What I found down there was worse than anything I could have imagined. Getting past the locked door required more planning than just curiosity and courage. For 3 days, I observed the patterns of who accessed the door and when. Dr. Harrison typically went down around 2 a.m. and returned before 4 a.m. Dr. Martinez visited twice weekly, usually between midnight and 1 a.m. The people in expensive suits came irregularly, but always during night shifts when minimal staff were present. I needed a keycard. On Friday night, Dr. Martinez was called to an emergency surgery on the 6th floor. I watched him rush from the basement corridor to the elevator, and in his hurry, he dropped his key card in the hallway. I picked it up and followed him to the surgical floor. Dr. Martinez, you dropped this, I said, handing him the card. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't know what I'd do without it. But what Dr. Martinez didn't know was that I'd already made a photocopy of both sides of the key card and noted the magnetic stripe pattern. My brother works in IT security, and he'd taught me how to clone access cards using equipment he had at home. It took me 2 days to create a working duplicate. Tuesday night, October 24th, was my chance. Skeleton crew on duty. Dr. Harrison had left early for a medical conference, and I was working the overnight shift with minimal supervision. At 2:30 a.m., I approached the locked door. My hands were shaking as I swiped the cloned key. For a moment, nothing happened, and I thought the duplication had failed. Then I heard a soft click, and the door opened. Beyond the door was exactly what Janet had described, not storage, but a clean, well-lit corridor that looked like it belonged in a modern medical facility. Polished floors, fluorescent lighting, and the smell of antiseptic and medical equipment. 20 feet down the corridor was an elevator with a control panel showing 4 levels: B1, B2, B3, and B4. I was standing on B1, the basement level I thought I knew. But there were 3 more levels below. I pressed the button for B2. The elevator descended for what felt like 30 seconds, much longer than a typical single-floor drop. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor that looked like the administrative wing of a research hospital. Multiple doors lined both sides of the hallway, each marked with professional nameplates. Dr. Richardson, Research Director; Dr. Kim, Clinical Trials Coordinator; Dr. Santos, Pharmaceutical Liaison. None of these were names I recognized from St. Mary's Hospital staff. I tried the first door, unlocked. Inside was a fully equipped medical office with examination tables, diagnostic equipment, and filing cabinets filled with patient records. But these weren't standard hospital files. The folders were marked with codes instead of names: Subject 47B, Subject 52A, Subject 61C. I opened Subject 47B. Inside was a complete medical file for Carmen Rodriguez, the woman who had supposedly died from a heart attack 3 weeks earlier. But according to these records, Carmen Rodriguez hadn't died. She was listed as status, active trial participant. The file contained daily medical observations, blood work results, medication schedules, and response tracking for something called Experimental Cardiac Regeneration Protocol, XR47. Carmen Rodriguez was alive, and she was being used as a test subject for experimental heart treatments. I opened more files. James Peterson, the motorcycle accident victim, Subject 5 to its status. Active trial participant, experimental neurological repair protocol, NR52, Maria Santos, the overdose case, Subject 61C, status, active trial participant, experimental detoxification and organ repair protocol, DR61. Every patient Dr. Harrison had pronounced dead was listed as an active research subject. But the most disturbing part was the section labeled selection criteria. Subjects must meet the following requirements: terminal or near-terminal condition, no immediate family members, no regular visitors, minimal social connections, and low probability of missing person reports. They weren't just taking dead patients for research, they were carefully selecting living patients who wouldn't be missed, faking their deaths, and using them for illegal medical experiments. I photographed every file I could with my phone, then continued exploring B2. The corridor had 12 offices, all containing similar patient files. Based on the subject numbers, they were conducting experiments on at least 70 people. At the end of the corridor was another elevator, this one going to B3 and B4. I pressed B3. When the doors opened, I stepped into what looked like a hospital ward, but wrong in every possible way. 24 beds lined the walls, each occupied by a patient connected to monitoring equipment and IV drips. But these patients weren't recovering from surgery or illness. They were unconscious, maintained in medically induced comas, with multiple tubes and wires attached to their bodies. I approached the first bed and nearly screamed. It was Carmen Rodriguez. She was alive, breathing, her heart beating steadily on the monitor. But she had surgical incisions on her chest that were clearly recent, and she was connected to equipment I'd never seen before. Devices that seemed to be monitoring and manipulating her cardiac function in real time. According to the chart at the foot of her bed, she was on day 21 of Cardiac Regeneration Protocol XR47. Day 21. She had supposedly died 21 days ago. I moved to the next bed. James Peterson, the motorcycle accident victim, also alive, also in an induced coma with surgical access points to his skull and spine. His chart showed day 18 of neurological repair protocol NR52. Bed after bed of patients I had helped pronounce dead, all alive, all being used as experimental subjects without their knowledge or consent. But the worst discovery was in bed number 18. Tommy Williams, 8 years old. I remembered him clearly because pediatric deaths are rare and heartbreaking. He had come in with acute leukemia complications. Despite intensive treatment, he had developed multiple organ failure, and Dr. Harrison had pronounced him dead after a 2-hour code blue. Tommy's parents had been devastated. I had held his mother while she cried, helped the father make funeral arrangements, and watched them leave the hospital carrying the few belongings their son had brought with him. But Tommy Williams was in bed, 18, alive, breathing, connected to experimental equipment that was apparently testing new leukemia treatments. His parents thought their child was dead and buried. But their 8-year-old son was 3 floors underground, being used as a research subject for experimental cancer drugs. The chart at the foot of his bed showed that he had been in the trial for 16 days. According to the medical notes, he had regained consciousness twice, but had been resedated to maintain trial protocol compliance. A conscious 8-year-old child, awake and confused in an underground medical facility, then drugged back into unconsciousness so experiments could continue. I was looking at a medical nightmare that violated every ethical principle I'd learned in nursing school. These people weren't conducting legitimate research. They were kidnapping terminal patients, faking their deaths, and using them as human guinea pigs for experimental treatments. And they were doing it in a secret facility built underneath the hospital where I'd worked for 9 years. I started photographing everything: the beds, the patients, the monitoring equipment, the medical charts. But as I moved through the ward, documenting the horror, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The elevator. Someone was coming down to B3. I looked around desperately for a place to hide, but the ward was open with nowhere to conceal myself. The elevator doors opened, and Dr. Harrison stepped out, followed by the woman in the lab coat I'd seen before. They saw me immediately. "Jennifer," Dr. Harrison said calmly. "I was wondering when curiosity would get the better of you. Dr. Harrison, these patients are supposed to be dead. You pronounced them dead. Their families think they're dead. Jennifer, you have no idea what you're looking at. These patients were terminal. They were going to die anyway. We're giving them a chance to contribute to medical science, to help save future lives. Their children?" I screamed, pointing at Tommy Williams. "He's 8 years old. His parents are grieving for him." "Tommy was going to die from leukemia," the woman said coldly. "Now, his death will have meaning. The research we're conducting could save thousands of children with similar conditions. This is kidnapping. This is torture. These people can't consent to experimental treatment." Dr. Harrison stepped closer to me. "Jennifer, these patients have no families, no one looking for them. They're perfect subjects for trials that could revolutionize medicine. Tommy Williams has parents. Carmen Rodriguez has a daughter. You made me lie to their families. Their families will grieve and move on, but the medical advances we achieve here will benefit humanity for generations." I realized that Dr. Harrison wasn't just conducting illegal experiments. He was completely convinced that what he was doing was justified. "Jennifer," he continued, "you have 2 choices. You can join our research team and help us save lives through cutting-edge medicine. Or, ... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood that I had discovered something that these people would kill to protect. And I was standing in an underground facility where patients disappeared and were presumed dead by the outside world. If I disappeared too, no one would think to look for me 3 floors underground. "What's it going to be, Jennifer?" Dr. Harrison asked. I looked around the ward at 24 unconscious patients who trusted the medical system to heal them, not use them as experimental subjects. I thought about Tommy Williams' parents, grieving for a son who was alive but unreachable, and I made the decision that would either save these patients or get me killed. I choose option 3, I said. What's option 3? Dr. Harrison asked. I'm going to expose this entire operation and make sure every one of these patients gets back to their families. Dr. Harrison sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. He nodded to the woman in the lab coat, who pulled out a syringe. Jennifer, you're about to become our newest research subject. Staring at that syringe, I realized I had approximately 30 seconds to either escape or become patient number 71 in an illegal medical experiment. Dr. Harrison, you don't want to do this, I said, backing toward the elevator. I'm a hospital employee. People will notice if I disappear. Jennifer, we've been selecting subjects for 3 years without anyone noticing. We're very good at making people disappear quietly. The woman with the syringe moved to block my path to the elevator. This will be much easier if you cooperate. The sedative will just make you comfortable while we prepare your treatment protocol. What treatment protocol? I'm not sick. You will be, Dr. Harrison said matter-of-factly. We'll induce a medical condition that requires experimental intervention. Our research covers cardiovascular, neurological, oncological, and psychiatric treatments. We'll find something suitable for your profile. The casual way he discussed creating artificial illness in a healthy person told me everything I needed to know about how far these people had descended into medical evil. I fainted toward the elevator, then suddenly ran toward the stairwell I'd noticed at the far end of the ward. Stop her, Dr. Harrison shouted. The woman with the syringe chased me, but I had a head start. I reached the stairwell door and yanked it open, revealing concrete steps leading both up and down. Up would take me back toward the hospital basement. Down would take me deeper into whatever this facility was. I chose down. If I was going to expose this operation, I needed to understand its full scope. The stairwell descended to more levels. At the bottom was a door marked B for authorized personnel only. I could hear Dr. Harrison and his colleague pursuing me down the stairs. I opened the B4 door and stepped into hell. B4 was an active medical facility where the unconscious patients from B3 were brought for procedures. 8 surgical suites fully equipped with modern operating equipment, anesthesia systems, and monitoring devices. But what I witnessed in those operating rooms was medical torture. In operating room 1, a patient I recognized as David Kim was undergoing brain surgery while conscious. Electrodes were being inserted into his brain tissue while he was awake and restrained, his eyes wide with terror and pain. Please, he was saying weakly, please, stop. I want to go home. The surgeon, who I didn't recognize, was documenting David's responses as various brain regions were stimulated. Subject's pain response remains elevated, the surgeon dictated to a recorder. Increasing electrode placement in region C7, David screamed. In operating room 2, Maria Santos was having organs surgically removed and replaced with experimental artificial devices while she was semi-conscious. The synthetic liver is integrating well, a technician noted. Subject is maintaining consciousness, which will allow us to monitor real-time adaptation responses. Maria was trying to speak, but tubes in her throat prevented clear communication. Her eyes showed complete terror and confusion. In operating room 3, the most horrific scene of all, Tommy Williams, the 8-year-old boy, was awake and crying while medical procedures were being performed on him. Mommy, he was sobbing. I want my mommy. Where is my mommy? Subject continues to request parental figures. A researcher documented, recommend increasing sedation to maintain experimental compliance. No, replied the lead researcher. We need him conscious to properly measure pain thresholds and psychological responses to the new treatment protocols. They were torturing a child to test experimental cancer treatments. I couldn't stay silent. Stop, I screamed, bursting into operating room 3. He's just a little boy. Tommy looked at me with hope and recognition. "Nurse Jenny, you came back. Please help me go home." The surgical team turned toward me in surprise. "Security to B4 immediately," one of them called into a radio. I ran to Tommy's bedside and started disconnecting the monitoring equipment. "Tommy, I'm going to get you out of here," I told him. "I knew you'd come back," Tommy cried. "They told me I died, but I knew that wasn't true because I'm still here. The medical team tried to stop me, but I've worked emergency medicine for 9 years. I know how to quickly disconnect life support equipment and prepare patients for transport." "Tommy, can you walk?" "I think so. They gave me medicine that made my legs weak, but I think I can walk." I helped Tommy off the operating table. He was weak from whatever drugs they'd given him, but he was mobile. "Nurse Jenny, are my parents here? They said my parents thought I was dead, but that's not true, right? Your parents are looking for you. Tommy, we're going to get you back to them." Security guards were now entering B4. I could hear Dr. Harrison shouting orders in the hallway. "All exits are secured," I heard over the radio. "Subject containment is critical." I looked around operating room 3 and realized there was no conventional exit that wouldn't lead us directly into security, but there was a laundry chute. "Tommy, we're going to take a ride." I opened the laundry chute and looked down. It appeared to go up several levels, probably connecting to the main hospital laundry system. "Are you scared of slides, Tommy?" "No, I like slides. This is going to be a really big slide, and it's going to take us somewhere safe." I lifted Tommy into the laundry chute first, then climbed in after him. We slid through darkness for what felt like forever, finally landing in a pile of hospital linens in the main laundry facility on the hospital's ground floor. Tommy was crying, but he was uninjured. "Nurse Jenny, I want to see my mommy and daddy." "We're going to call them right now, Tommy." I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I need police and FBI immediately. There's an illegal medical facility in the basement where patients are being held against their will for experimental procedures." "Ma'am, can you repeat that?" "There are 70 patients being held in an underground facility beneath St. Mary's Hospital. They've been kidnapped for medical experiments. I have a child victim with me right now. We're dispatching units immediately. Are you in a safe location?" I looked around the laundry facility. Hospital security would be searching for us, but we were now in the main hospital where there were cameras and other staff members. "We're in the main hospital laundry room. Please hurry. Units are en route. Stay on the line." Tommy was holding my hand tightly. "Nurse Jenny, are we safe now?" "Yes, Tommy, we're safe. And we're going to make sure all the other patients down there get safe too. The other patients can't go home." "Not yet, but they will. I promise you, they will." Within 10 minutes, I heard sirens outside the hospital. Within 20 minutes, Chicago Police Department and FBI agents were interviewing me in the hospital lobby while Tommy was being examined by pediatric doctors who weren't involved in Dr. Harrison's operation. "Ms. Walsh, these are very serious allegations," Agent Martinez told me. "Are you certain about what you witnessed?" I showed him the photographs on my phone. "Agent Martinez, there are 70 people being held in an underground facility beneath this hospital. They've been kidnapped, their deaths have been faked, and they're being used for illegal medical experiments." Agent Martinez studied the photos. "Ma'am, if this is accurate, we're looking at the largest medical kidnapping operation in U.S. history." "It's accurate." "And Agent Martinez, some of those patients are children." Agent Martinez immediately called for additional units and federal medical response teams. "We're going to need search warrants, medical teams, and victim services coordinators," he told his colleagues. As law enforcement prepared to raid the underground facility, I sat with Tommy in the pediatric wing waiting for his parents to arrive. "Tommy, your parents are driving here right now. They're going to be so happy to see you. They thought I was dead. The bad doctors told them you were dead so they could keep you for their experiments. But your parents never stopped loving you. Will the other kids get to see their parents too?" "Yes, Tommy, everyone is going to go home. But even as I promised Tommy that everyone would go home, I realized I had no idea how many people were actually in that underground facility, how long this operation had been running, or how many patients might not survive the rescue operation. What I had discovered beneath St. Mary's Hospital was just the beginning of a medical horror that would take months to fully understand. And I was about to learn that Dr. Harrison's operation was much larger than I had imagined, while Tommy was being reunited with his parents, a scene that made hardened. FBI agents Agent Martinez pulled me aside with news that made my blood run cold. Ms. Walsh, we've secured the underground facility, but what we found is much worse than your initial report. Worse? How? There aren't 70 patients down there. There are 127, and this operation has been running for 8 years, not 3. Agent Martinez showed me preliminary documentation the FBI had recovered from B2, according to these records. Dr. Harrison has been selecting terminal patients since 2016. The success rate of his experimental treatments is actually quite high, about 60% survival and improvement. But the methods, What methods? The patients who don't survive the experiments are disposed of through the hospital's regular cremation services. Their families never know their loved ones were used as test subjects before actually dying. The magnitude of what I had uncovered was staggering. Hundreds of families had been lied to about how their relatives died. Agent Martinez, how many people were involved in this? Preliminary investigation suggests 12 doctors, 18 nurses, 6 administrators, and multiple pharmaceutical company representatives. This wasn't one rogue physician. This was a coordinated operation involving multiple institutions. Pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Harrison was contracted by 3 major pharmaceutical companies to conduct human trials that would normally take years to approve through legal channels. They were paying him millions of dollars for rapid results on experimental treatments. Agent Martinez showed me financial records indicating that Dr. Harrison had received over $15 million in payments from pharmaceutical companies over 8 years. The companies were getting experimental data on treatments for cancer, heart disease, neurological disorders, and psychiatric conditions. Data that would normally require years of animal testing and FDA approval processes, so they were skipping safety protocols by using kidnapped patients. Exactly. And because the patients were supposed to be dead, there was no oversight, no informed consent, no safety monitoring. As we talked, more victims were being brought up from the underground levels. I watched as patient after patient was wheeled past us people I had helped pronounce dead, now being taken to legitimate hospital rooms for actual medical care. Carmen Rodriguez, awake and confused, asking why her daughter thought she was dead. James Peterson, recovering from unauthorized brain surgery with no memory of the past 3 weeks. Maria Santos, discovering that artificial organs had been implanted in her body without her knowledge or consent. Each patient represented a family that had been lied to, a funeral that had been held for someone who was still alive. A tragedy that could have been prevented if I had investigated the locked door years earlier. But the most disturbing discovery came when FBI agents accessed Dr. Harrison's personal files. Ms. Walsh, Dr. Harrison kept detailed records of potential future subjects, Agent Martinez told me. There's a list of current hospital patients he was monitoring for possible selection. What kind of list? Agent Martinez showed me a document that made me sick. It was a spreadsheet with names, medical conditions, family situations, and social connections of every patient currently in St. Mary's Hospital. My name was on the list. According to these notes, Dr. Harrison was planning to induce a medical emergency in you within the next 2 weeks, Agent Martinez explained. He was going to make it look like you suffered sudden cardiac arrest during a night shift. Then use you as a subject for cardiovascular experiments. He was going to kill me and use me for research. The plan was to make your death look natural, then transport you to the underground facility for experimental treatments. According to his notes. Your medical knowledge would have made you a particularly valuable research subject. I realized that my curiosity about the locked door had probably saved my life. If I hadn't investigated when I did, I would have become patient number 128. Over the next several hours, the scope of the operation became clear. The underground facility had been built in phases: B1 basement level, administrative offices, and initial patient intake; B2 research offices and pharmaceutical company liaison facilities; B3 patient housing and medical monitoring; B4 surgical suites and experimental treatment areas. But there was also a B5 level that I hadn't reached. "What's on B5?" I asked Agent Martinez. "That's where they kept the failed experiments." Failed experiments. Patients who died during experimental treatments, but whose deaths couldn't be reported because they were supposed to already be dead. Dr. Harrison was storing the bodies until he could dispose of them safely. Agent Martinez paused. "There are 43 bodies on B5, representing 8 years of failed experiments. 43 people who had died twice, once officially when Dr. Harrison pronounced them dead, and once actually when his experiments killed them. 43 families who would never know that their loved ones had suffered and died." A second time, in an underground laboratory. "Agent Martinez, will the families be told what really happened?" "That's going to be complicated. Many of the victims' families have moved on, remarried, started new lives. Learning that their loved one actually died months or years later than they believed could be traumatic. But they deserve to know the truth. Yes, they do. But revealing the truth is going to destroy hundreds of families' ability to find closure." As dawn broke over Chicago, I sat in the hospital lobby watching victims being transported to legitimate medical facilities. Families being reunited with relatives they thought were dead, and FBI agents carrying evidence that would result in the largest medical malpractice prosecution in U.S. history. Tommy Williams was sleeping in his mother's arms, finally safe and going home. Carmen Rodriguez was on the phone with her daughter, trying to explain that she hadn't actually died from a heart attack. James Peterson was meeting with neurologists to assess what permanent damage had been done by unauthorized brain surgery. But I kept thinking about the 43 bodies on B5, and all the families who would never have reunions, never get closure, never know that their loved ones had been tortured before finally dying. "Ms. Walsh," Agent Martinez said, "you should know that your actions saved 127 lives. Without your investigation, this operation could have continued for years." "Agent Martinez, what's going to happen to Dr. Harrison?" "He's going to face federal charges for kidnapping, human trafficking, medical malpractice, and murder. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, and the pharmaceutical companies, that's going to be more complicated. They'll claim they thought the research was being conducted legally. Corporate accountability in cases like this is difficult to prove." I realized that while individual doctors would face justice, the system that enabled this horror might continue to exist. "Agent Martinez, how do we prevent this from happening again?" "Better oversight, stricter regulations, and people like you who are willing to investigate when something doesn't seem right." As I prepared to leave St. Mary's Hospital for what I knew would be the last time, I thought about the locked door that had bothered me for 9 years. I had finally found out why it was always locked. And I wished I never had. After the FBI raid and Tommy's rescue, I thought the nightmare was over. I was wrong. The nightmare was just beginning. 3 days after Dr. Harrison's arrest, I received my first warning. I was leaving my apartment to go grocery shopping when I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. 2 men in suits were sitting inside, watching my building. When I walked toward my car, the SUV started its engine and slowly drove past me. The passenger rolled down his window and made eye contact with me for several seconds before they drove away. No words were spoken, but the message was clear: "We're watching you." That evening, my apartment's fire alarm went off at 2 a.m. When I called the fire department, they found no evidence of smoke or fire. But when I checked my apartment afterward, I noticed that my laptop had been moved. My files had been accessed. Photos I had taken of the underground facility had been deleted. Someone had been in my apartment while I was outside during the false alarm. The next morning, I called Agent Martinez. Agent Martinez, I think I'm being followed and my apartment was broken into. Ms. Walsh, Dr. Harrison and his immediate team are in federal custody. Who would be following you? I don't know, but someone deleted the photos from my laptop, and I've seen the same SUV outside my building twice. Jennifer, you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes our minds create threats that aren't actually there. Agent Martinez, I'm not paranoid. Someone broke into my apartment and deleted evidence. I'll have a patrol car check your area more frequently, but honestly, with Dr. Harrison in custody, I don't see who would have motivation to intimidate you. Agent Martinez didn't understand what I was beginning to realize. Dr. Harrison's operation had been too sophisticated, too well-funded, and too well-connected to be the work of one rogue doctor. Someone with serious money and power had been behind the underground facility, and that someone was still free. 2 days later, I received a phone call that confirmed my worst fears. Ms. Walsh, this is Dr. Rebecca Chen from the University of Chicago Medical Center. I understand you were involved in exposing the illegal research at St. Mary's Hospital, yes? That's correct. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I have some information that might interest you. Dr. Chen suggested a small cafe near the university. When I arrived, she was already seated in a corner booth, looking nervous. Ms. Walsh, thank you for meeting with me. What I'm about to tell you could put both of us in serious danger. What kind of danger? The pharmaceutical companies that were funding Dr. Harrison's research, they're still operating. Dr. Harrison wasn't their only contractor. Dr. Chen pulled out a manila folder containing documents. These are internal communications from Meridian Pharmaceuticals, one of the companies that paid Dr. Harrison for experimental data. According to these emails, they have similar operations running in at least 6 other cities. I looked at the documents, email chains discussing subject acquisition protocols, facility security measures, and legal exposure mitigation. Dr. Chen, how did you get these documents? I used to work for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I was their liaison with Dr. Harrison's operation. When the FBI raided St. Mary's, I realized I had been part of something horrible. You knew about the kidnapping. I knew we were getting experimental data much faster than normal FDA approval processes would allow. I assumed Dr. Harrison had found ways to expedite legal trials. I didn't know he was using kidnapped patients. Dr. Chen showed me more documents, financial records, showing millions of dollars in payments to medical facilities across the country. Jennifer, Meridian Pharmaceuticals has been funding illegal human experimentation for over a decade. The data they collected from Dr. Harrison's operation is being used to develop treatments that will generate billions in revenue. Are you saying there are other underground facilities like the one at St. Mary's? I'm saying that Dr. Harrison's arrest has made them more careful, but hasn't stopped them. They're relocating operations, improving security, and eliminating witnesses who might expose them. What do you mean, eliminating witnesses? Dr. Chen's hands were shaking as she pulled out newspaper clippings. 3 researchers who worked on projects similar to Dr. Harrison's have died in the past month. Car accidents, heart attacks, apparent suicides, all ruled accidental or natural causes. She showed me obituaries for Dr. Marcus Johnson, Dr. Sarah Williams, and Dr. David Kim, all researchers who had worked on pharmaceutical company contracts involving experimental human trials. Jennifer, these people had information that could expose the entire network of illegal research facilities. Now, they're all dead. Dr. Chen, why are you telling me this? Because you're next on their list. Your testimony is going to be crucial in prosecuting the pharmaceutical companies. If you die before the trial, their legal exposure decreases significantly. I felt ice run through my veins. Are you saying they're planning to kill me? I'm saying that 3 people with information similar to yours have died in the past month under suspicious circumstances. And I'm saying that the black SUV you've been seeing belongs to a private security company that Meridian Pharmaceuticals uses for problem resolution. Dr. Chen slid a business card across the table. This is a contact at the FBI who specializes in pharmaceutical company crimes. Agent Sarah Rodriguez. She's been investigating Meridian Pharmaceuticals for 2 years, but she needs witnesses who are willing to testify. What about you? Will you testify? I'm leaving the country tonight. I've accepted a research position in Switzerland. It's the only way I can stay alive long enough to help expose this operation from a safe distance. After Dr. Chen left, I sat in that cafe for 2 hours trying to process what I had learned. Dr. Harrison hadn't been a rogue doctor conducting illegal experiments. He had been part of a massive network of pharmaceutical company-funded human experimentation. And the people running that network were willing to kill to protect their profits. I called Agent Rodriguez immediately. Agent Rodriguez, this is Jennifer Walsh from the St. Mary's Hospital case. I have information about pharmaceutical companies that were funding Dr. Harrison's research. Ms. Walsh, I've been hoping you would call. Can you meet me at the FBI field office immediately? Agent Rodriguez, I think people are trying to intimidate me. I've been followed, my apartment was broken into, and I have information suggesting that other witnesses have been killed. Ms. Walsh, come to the FBI office right now. Don't go home, don't stop anywhere, just come directly here. We'll provide protection while we discuss what you know. As I drove to the FBI office, I noticed the same black SUV following me. When I turned, it turned. When I stopped at traffic lights, it stopped behind me. I called Agent Rodriguez while driving. Agent Rodriguez, the SUV is following me right now. Ms. Walsh, how far are you from the FBI building? About 10 minutes. Keep driving toward us. I'm sending agents to intercept the vehicle following you. 5 minutes later, I saw FBI vehicles in my rearview mirror moving toward the black SUV. The SUV immediately changed direction and disappeared into traffic. When I arrived at the FBI building, Agent Rodriguez was waiting with a team of federal agents. Ms. Walsh, you're now under federal witness protection. The pharmaceutical companies involved in Dr. Harrison's operation view you as a critical threat to their continued operations. Agent Rodriguez, how many other facilities like Dr. Harrison's are there? Based on our investigation, at least 12 facilities in 8 states. We're talking about thousands of patients who have been kidnapped for illegal medical experiments over the past decade. Thousands. Jennifer, what you discovered at St. Mary's Hospital was just one facility in a network that generates over $500 million annually in illegal pharmaceutical research profits. Agent Rodriguez showed me a map with pins marking suspected illegal research facilities across the United States. Every pin represents a hospital, clinic, or research facility where we suspect pharmaceutical companies are conducting unauthorized human trials. How is this possible? How can this many people be involved in kidnapping patients without anyone noticing? Because they're very careful about selecting victims. Terminal patients, elderly people with no family, homeless individuals, immigrants without documentation. People who won't be missed if they disappear. Agent Rodriguez, what do you need from me? We need you to testify about what you witnessed at St. Mary's Hospital. Your testimony will be the key to prosecuting not just Dr. Harrison, but the pharmaceutical executives who funded his operation. And if I testify, you'll be providing evidence that could shut down a network of illegal human experimentation that has been operating for over a decade. You'll be saving thousands of lives. But I'll also be putting myself in permanent danger from people who have already killed to protect this operation. Agent Rodriguez nodded grimly. Jennifer, I won't lie to you. Testifying against pharmaceutical companies with this much money and power is dangerous. But not testifying means allowing this network to continue kidnapping and experimenting on vulnerable patients. I looked at the map showing 12 suspected facilities. Across 8 states, thousands of patients, hundreds of millions in illegal profits. A network of medical professionals who had abandoned every ethical principle they had sworn to uphold. Agent Rodriguez, how long do I have to decide? The grand jury convenes in 2 weeks. If you're going to testify, we need to prepare your statement and ensure your safety. And if I don't testify, then the pharmaceutical companies will probably avoid prosecution. The illegal research facilities will continue operating, and thousands more patients will be kidnapped for unauthorized experiments. I thought about Tommy Williams, asking why the bad doctors had told his parents he was dead. I thought about Carmen Rodriguez, waking up confused after weeks of unauthorized heart surgery. I thought about the 43 bodies on B5. People who had died twice because someone wanted to test experimental treatments without FDA oversight. Agent Rodriguez, I'll testify, but I need to know that my testimony will actually stop this network. Jennifer, your testimony won't just stop this network. It will expose the entire system of pharmaceutical company corruption that makes networks like this possible. What do you mean? We're not just prosecuting Dr. Harrison and Meridian Pharmaceuticals. We're prosecuting a system that prioritizes profits over patient safety, that allows insurance companies to deny life-saving treatments, and that creates incentives for illegal human experimentation. Agent Rodriguez, this is bigger than just medical kidnapping, isn't it? Jennifer, this is about the entire American healthcare system and whether patients are human beings deserving of ethical treatment or commodities to be used for corporate profit. As I prepared to enter federal witness protection, I realized that discovering what was behind that locked door had made me a key witness in the largest medical corruption case in U.S. history. And people were willing to kill to prevent me from testifying about what I had seen. But I also realized that staying silent would mean abandoning thousands of patients who were still trapped in facilities like the one I had discovered beneath St. Mary's Hospital. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Federal witness protection meant living in a safe house outside Chicago, while preparing for testimony that would determine whether thousands of kidnapped patients would ever be rescued. For 2 weeks, I worked with federal prosecutors to prepare a statement that would expose the entire network of pharmaceutical company-funded human experimentation. But 3 days before the grand jury hearing, something happened that changed everything I thought I understood about the case. Agent Rodriguez called me at 6 a.m. Jennifer, we have a problem. Dr. Harrison wants to meet with you. That's impossible. He's in federal custody. He's willing to provide testimony against the pharmaceutical companies, but only if he can speak with you first. Why would he want to speak with me? He says he has information that will change your perspective on everything you witnessed at St. Mary's Hospital. Agent Rodriguez, I don't want to speak with Dr. Harrison. He kidnapped 127 people and killed 43 others. Jennifer, Dr. Harrison claims he can provide evidence that will lead to the rescue of over 2,000 patients currently being held in illegal research facilities across the country. 2,000 patients, the number was staggering, but he'll only provide this information if he can explain his actions to you personally. What kind of explanation could possibly justify what he did? I don't know. But if there are 2,000 people currently trapped in facilities like the one you discovered, don't we have an obligation to listen? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet with Dr. Harrison at the Federal Detention Center. He was brought into the meeting room in shackles, looking older and more exhausted than I remembered. Jennifer, thank you for coming. Dr. Harrison, Agent Rodriguez says you have information about other patients who need to be rescued. I do, but first, I need you to understand something about the patients we treated at St. Mary's Hospital. What about them? Dr. Harrison pulled out a folder containing medical records. Jennifer, every patient we selected for experimental treatment was going to die within 60 days. Not 60 years, not 60 months. 60 days. He showed me detailed medical analyses of each patient I had helped rescue. Carmen Rodriguez had severe cardiomyopathy. Her heart was functioning at 15% capacity. No surgeon in the country would have performed the experimental cardiac repair surgery she needed because it was too risky and not FDA approved. That doesn't justify kidnapping her. Carmen Rodriguez is alive today because of the experimental treatment we provided. Without our intervention, she would have died 6 weeks after we pronounced her dead. Dr. Harrison continued through the files. James Peterson had an undiagnosed brain aneurysm that would have killed him within a month. The experimental neurological repair we performed prevented his death. Tommy Williams had acute lymphoblastic leukemia with a 97% fatality rate. The experimental treatment we provided put his cancer into complete remission. Dr. Harrison, these people couldn't consent to experimental treatment. Jennifer, these people were terminal cases that the medical system had given up on. Their insurance companies had denied coverage for experimental treatments. Their families couldn't afford private pay options. They were going to die with no chance of survival. But you lied to their families. You made them think their loved ones were dead. We told their families they were dead because we couldn't guarantee the experimental treatments would work. If the treatments failed, the patients would actually die, and the families would grieve once instead of twice. Dr. Harrison showed me success rate statistics. Jennifer, 68% of our patients survived and recovered from conditions that would have been fatal with conventional treatment. What about the 32% who died? They would have died anyway. But their deaths contributed to medical research that will save thousands of future lives. I stared at Dr. Harrison, trying to understand his logic. Dr. Harrison, are you saying you believe what you did was ethical? Jennifer, I'm saying that our medical system condemns terminal patients to death when experimental treatments could save them, simply because those treatments haven't completed FDA approval processes that take years. So you decided to bypass the approval process by kidnapping patients. I decided to give terminal patients access to treatments that could save their lives. Treatments they couldn't access through legal channels because of insurance bureaucracy and regulatory delays. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. Jennifer, how many patients have you watched die because their insurance company wouldn't approve experimental treatments? The question hit me like a physical blow. In 9 years of emergency medicine, I had watched dozens of patients die from conditions that had experimental treatments available but not covered by insurance. That doesn't justify kidnapping, doesn't it? If you knew you could save a child's life with an experimental treatment, but the child's family couldn't afford it and insurance wouldn't cover it, what would you do? I would try to find legal ways to get the treatment approved. And while you spent months navigating bureaucracy, the child would die. Dr. Harrison pulled out photographs. Jennifer, these are pictures of the 84 patients who survived our experimental treatments and are alive today because of procedures they couldn't have received through legal channels. The photographs showed Carmen Rodriguez at her daughter's wedding, healthy and smiling. James Peterson playing with his grandchildren, his brain aneurysm completely repaired. Tommy Williams at his Little League game, cancer-free and thriving. These people are alive because we were willing to break laws that condemned them to death. Dr. Harrison, what about informed consent? What about their right to choose their own medical treatment? Jennifer, when a patient is terminal and conventional medicine has no solution, is it more ethical to let them die with their consent or save their life without it? The question created a moral dilemma I wasn't prepared to address. I don't know. That's the question that has haunted me for 8 years. Is it more ethical to respect a terminal patient's autonomy and let them die, or violate their autonomy and save their life? Dr. Harrison showed me more files. Jennifer, the pharmaceutical companies that funded our research weren't just interested in profits. They were trying to develop treatments for conditions that kill millions of people every year. The experimental cardiac procedures we developed are now being used, legally, to save thousands of heart disease patients. The neurological treatments we tested are being used to prevent strokes and brain injuries. The cancer protocols we developed have improved survival rates for childhood leukemia by 40%. Our illegal research has led to legal treatments that save lives every day. I felt sick. Dr. Harrison was asking me to consider whether the ends justified the means. Whether saving lives through illegal methods was preferable to allowing deaths through legal inaction. Dr. Harrison, what information do you have about other facilities? Jennifer, there are currently 2,147 patients being held in 12 facilities across 8 states. All of them are terminal cases who have been pronounced dead, but are being treated with experimental therapies that could save their lives. All of them kidnapped, like the patients at St. Mary's. All of them selected from patients who were going to die anyway, just like the patients we treated. Dr. Harrison pulled out a map showing the locations of active facilities. If you testify against the pharmaceutical companies, these facilities will be shut down immediately. The 2,147 patients currently receiving potentially life-saving experimental treatments will be returned to their families. That's good, isn't it, Jennifer? 1,400 of those patients will die within 60 days of being removed from experimental treatment protocols. They're alive right now because of illegal medical procedures that they can't continue receiving once the facilities are closed. The moral complexity was staggering. Testifying against the pharmaceutical companies would rescue 2,147 kidnapped patients, but it would also condemn 1,400 of them to death from terminal illnesses. Dr. Harrison, what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to consider whether exposing our operations will save more lives or cost more lives. What's the alternative? The alternative is allowing the research to continue under improved oversight. We could develop legal protocols for providing experimental treatments to terminal patients who can't access them through conventional channels. You mean continue the kidnapping but make it legal? I mean develop a system where terminal patients can voluntarily participate in experimental treatments that could save their lives. Treatments they currently can't access because of insurance and regulatory barriers. Dr. Harrison showed me proposed legislation. Jennifer, we could create legal pathways for experimental treatment access that would eliminate the need for covert operations, but that would take years to implement. What about the patients who are currently being held? They could continue receiving experimental treatments while we develop legal alternatives. The ones who survive would be reunited with their families as success stories. The ones who don't survive would have died anyway, but their deaths would contribute to research that saves future lives. I realized that Dr. Harrison wasn't asking me to support kidnapping and illegal experimentation. He was asking me to consider whether our medical system's approach to terminal illness was itself unethical, and whether illegal solutions might be more moral than legal inaction. Dr. Harrison, I need time to think about this. Jennifer, the grand jury hearing is tomorrow. If you testify as planned, 2,147 patients will be rescued from illegal medical facilities. But 1,400 of them will die from their terminal illnesses within 2 months. And if I don't testify, the pharmaceutical companies will avoid prosecution, the research facilities will continue operating, and we'll have time to develop legal alternatives that could provide experimental treatment access to terminal patients. But the kidnapping would continue. The life-saving treatments would continue. Whether we call it kidnapping or compassionate intervention is a matter of perspective. As I left the detention center, I realized that my testimony would determine not just the fate of Dr. Harrison and the pharmaceutical companies, but the lives of over 2,000 patients and the future of how our medical system treats terminal illness. The question wasn't whether Dr. Harrison was a criminal. The question was whether our legal medical system was ethical when it condemned terminal patients to death, rather than providing access to experimental treatments that could save them. And I had less than 24 hours to decide which system was more moral, legal inaction or illegal intervention. The night before my grand jury testimony, I sat in my safe house staring at 2 folders. Folder 1 contained my original testimony, a detailed account of Dr. Harrison's crimes that would result in the prosecution of everyone involved in the illegal research network. Folder 2 contained an alternative testimony that Dr. Harrison's attorney had prepared a statement that would expose the pharmaceutical companies while arguing for legal reform of experimental treatment access. At 3 a.m., I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called Agent Rodriguez. Agent Rodriguez, I want to modify my testimony. Jennifer, the hearing is in 6 hours. What kind of modifications? I want to testify about everything I witnessed at St. Mary's Hospital. But I also want to address the systemic problems that made Dr. Harrison's operation possible. What do you mean? I mean that prosecuting Dr. Harrison without addressing the medical system failures that created the need for his operation won't prevent future illegal research facilities. When I appeared before the grand jury at 9 a.m., I delivered testimony that no one expected. Members of the grand jury, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I am here to testify about illegal medical research conducted at St. Mary's Hospital. But I am also here to testify about legal medical practices that I believe are equally unethical. I described everything I had witnessed in the underground facility, the kidnapped patients, the unauthorized experiments, the families who were lied to about their loved ones' deaths. But I also described something else. In my 9 years as an emergency room nurse, I have watched 67 patients die from conditions that had experimental treatments available, treatments that could have saved their lives. But treatments that were denied by insurance companies or unavailable due to FDA approval delays. I watched Maria Santos' 8-year-old nephew die from leukemia in 2019. Because his family couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might have saved him the same treatment that successfully cured Tommy Williams in Dr. Harrison's illegal facility. I watched Robert Kim die from the same brain aneurysm condition that James Peterson survived, because Mr. Kim's insurance company refused to approve the experimental surgery that Dr. Harrison performed illegally on Mr. Peterson. I watched dozens of terminal patients die while experimental treatments that could have saved them remained inaccessible due to legal and financial barriers. Dr. Harrison's methods were illegal and unethical. But the legal medical system that forces terminal patients to die rather than providing access to potentially life-saving experimental treatments is also unethical. The grand jury needs to understand that Dr. Harrison's operation existed because our legal medical system fails terminal patients. Prosecuting Dr. Harrison without addressing those system failures will only create more Dr. Harrisons. I recommended that the grand jury issue indictments against Dr. Harrison and the pharmaceutical company executives, but also recommend legislative action to provide legal pathways for experimental treatment access. The grand jury deliberated for 3 days. Their decision was unprecedented. They issued criminal indictments against Dr. Harrison and 12 pharmaceutical company executives for kidnapping, human trafficking, and illegal human experimentation. But they also issued a formal recommendation to Congress for emergency legislation, creating legal access to experimental treatments for terminal patients. The recommendation, known as the Walsh Protocol, established legal pathways for terminal patients to access experimental treatments with informed consent, insurance coverage, and medical oversight. Dr. Harrison was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but he was also appointed as a consultant to help design the legal experimental treatment protocols that would replace illegal operations like his. The pharmaceutical companies paid $2.8 billion in fines and were required to provide free experimental treatments to any terminal patient who qualified under the new legal protocols. Most importantly, the 2,147 patients being held in illegal research facilities were rescued and given the choice to continue their experimental treatments under legal oversight or return to conventional medical care. 1,847 patients chose to continue experimental treatments legally. 300 patients chose to return to their families and discontinue experimental care. Of the 1,847 patients who continued treatment, 1,203 survived and recovered from terminal conditions that would have killed them without experimental intervention. Of the 300 patients who chose to discontinue treatment, 67 died from their terminal illnesses within 6 months, but they died at home with their families rather than in secret research facilities. Tommy Williams became the first pediatric patient to receive legal experimental cancer treatment under the Walsh Protocol. His recovery was documented and used to develop treatments that have since saved over 3,000 children with similar conditions. Carmen Rodriguez's experimental heart surgery was refined and approved for legal use. The procedure she received illegally is now a standard treatment that saves over 10,000 heart disease patients annually. James Peterson's brain surgery led to legal treatments for aneurysms that have prevented over 15,000 strokes. The illegal research that violated every ethical principle I believed in had produced legal treatments that save thousands of lives every year. 3 years after my testimony, I received a letter that summarized the moral complexity of everything I had experienced. Dear Ms. Walsh, my name is Dr. Sarah Martinez, and I am the director of the new Legal Medical Research Initiative that was created following your testimony about the St. Mary's Hospital case. I wanted to update you on the impact of the Walsh Protocol legislation that resulted from your grand jury testimony. In the past 3 years, 12,847 terminal patients have received legal experimental treatments through Walsh Protocol programs. 8,234 of these patients have survived conditions that would have been fatal under conventional treatment. The research data collected from legal experimental treatments has led to FDA approval of 47 new treatments for previously incurable conditions. The pharmaceutical companies that were prosecuted for funding illegal research are now the primary funders of legal experimental treatment programs, providing over $500 million annually in free treatments for terminal patients. Most importantly, no new illegal research facilities have been discovered since the Walsh Protocol created legal alternatives for experimental treatment access. Your testimony didn't just expose medical crimes, it created legal solutions that eliminated the need for future medical crimes. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Director, Legal Medical Research Initiative today. I work as the National Coordinator for the Walsh Protocol Program, helping terminal patients access legal, experimental treatments and ensuring that no one else needs to be kidnapped to receive potentially life-saving medical care. I visit Tommy Williams regularly. He's 14 now, has been cancer-free for 4 years, and volunteers at children's hospitals to help other kids facing serious illnesses. Ms. Jennifer, he told me last month, I'm glad the bad doctors got in trouble for kidnapping people, but I'm also glad that the experimental treatment they gave me is now available to other kids who need it. Tommy, how do you feel about everything that happened to you? I feel sad that I was taken away from my parents and that they thought I was dead. That was really scary and wrong. But I also feel happy that I'm alive and that other kids with leukemia can get the same treatment I got. But legally, and with their parents knowing what's happening, I think the most important thing is that sick kids get help, but that their families don't have to be scared or lied to. Tommy's perspective, that medical innovation and ethical treatment aren't mutually exclusive, has become the foundation of the Walsh Protocol program. The locked door at St. Mary's Hospital taught me that sometimes the greatest evil and the greatest good can exist in the same place. Conducted by the same people. Using the same methods. Dr. Harrison saved 84 lives through methods that violated everything I believed about medical ethics. Our legal medical system condemned hundreds of terminal patients to death through methods that respected their autonomy and followed all ethical guidelines. The question I struggled with wasn't which approach was more ethical. Both approaches had profound moral problems. The question was whether we could develop approaches that were both effective and ethical. The Walsh Protocol represents our attempt to create medical systems that save lives while respecting patient rights, that provide access to experimental treatments while maintaining informed consent, that allow medical innovation while preventing exploitation. Is it perfect? No. Terminal patients still die while waiting for experimental treatments to be approved. Insurance companies still deny coverage for some experimental therapies. Regulatory processes still move slowly while people suffer, but it's better than the alternatives, both the illegal kidnapping I discovered behind that locked door, and the legal abandonment of terminal patients that made that kidnapping seem necessary. If you work in healthcare, if you've been a terminal patient, if you've watched someone die from a condition that had experimental treatments available but inaccessibly, want you to know this. The fight for ethical medical care isn't between legal and illegal methods. The fight is between medical systems that prioritize patient welfare and medical systems that prioritize institutional protection. The fight is between approaches that see patients as human beings deserving of every possible chance at life, and approaches that see patients as legal liabilities to be managed carefully. The fight is between innovation that includes ethical oversight and innovation that ignores ethical constraints entirely. Some doors are locked to hide crimes. Other doors are locked to protect institutional policies that are themselves harmful. The most important doors to open are the ones that lead to medical systems where patients receive both effective treatment and ethical care, where experimental treatments are available to everyone who needs them, not just people who can afford them or people who get kidnapped for them, where medical innovation serves patient welfare rather than corporate profits, and where no one ever again has to choose between saving lives and respecting human dignity. The next time you encounter a medical system that seems more interested in protecting itself than protecting patients, remember that change is possible. But change requires people who are willing to ask difficult questions, investigate uncomfortable situations, and fight for solutions that seem impossible. Some doors should never be locked, and some secrets should never be kept. But some changes should never be considered impossible. The patients we serve deserve nothing less than medical systems that are both effective and ethical, even when creating those systems requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about the institutions we work within, even when it means discovering that the people we trusted were capable of both great evil and great good, and even when it means admitting that sometimes the most illegal actions and the most legal policies can be equally harmful to the people we're supposed to protect. The locked door taught me that the most important medical discoveries aren't just about new treatments, they're about new ways of delivering those treatments that honor both the science of medicine and the humanity of patients. That's a discovery worth fighting for, even when the fight takes you places you never wanted to go.